Welcome back to the channel. I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, and in today's video, you're going to learn about 3 wide receivers who are mega breakout candidates. 2 are more high-end wide receivers, but 1 is a tremendous value, regardless as to whether it's dynasty or redraft. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My first candidate is Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson. Still just 23 years old, going into his 3rd season. We all thought that he was going to have a massive breakout this past year. Then 4 snaps into the season, Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, Zach Wilson comes in, worse quarterbacks come in, and really just disaster struck. It ruined everything the Jets had in motion. They had an elite defense. They could have had a great running game. They could have been dangerous through the air. Instead, none of these things happened, and it led to a second straight, slightly disappointing season for what should be an elite, top-shelf wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. His targets were so awful that he wasn't even able to finish as a wide receiver 2 this past year. Looking into where he's being drafted, in Dynasty, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 7 at the 209. I think this is a fantastic value, and here's why. He's, first of all, likely to either meet or exceed his ADP. I think he's going to exceed his ADP. I view him as a top 5 wide receiver this year. But then secondly, guess what? When he does this, his market value is going to go up tremendously. That way, if you want to get out from Garrett Wilson, you can do so, because after a wide receiver has a top shelf season, they are ridiculously expensive. Seriously, try trading for basically any wide receiver besides Puka Nacua, who was still going to be expensive, but you have to pay ridiculous prices for CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. They're almost untradeable assets because you're going to have to lose so much value that it's just not going to be worth it. He is going to carry so much value after this season. And he still does have the value right now, really, but trust me, he's going to be viewed as a top 5 wide receiver after the season, and you can cash out. Looking into redraft, Garrett Wilson is drafted as the wide receiver 8. That's because in Dynasty, Tyreek Hill is not going to be anywhere near the top end of the wide receivers, but in redraft it makes sense. He's a threat to be the number 1 wide receiver any year. But this is about Garrett Wilson. He's being drafted at the 208, so essentially the same position. He's one of the best wide receivers after the catch, finishing number 4 in juke rate among wide receivers. He stands alone in the offense. He's going to have Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball to him. He is one of the most talented wide receivers in the league, and he is finally about to show everybody. In a recent article, Garrett Wilson described this past year as the worst year of his entire life. I believe him. Throughout his career, he's played at Ohio State, where he had C.J. Stroud as his quarterback a majority of the time. That was awesome for him. Then he went to the Jets. And as a rookie, expectations weren't that high. So you could definitely understand, though, even though it was disappointing, some people believed in Zach Wilson, but whether he did or not, he still had a respectable year. He finished as a wide receiver 2, as a matter of fact. And this past year, expectations had never been higher for him. Aaron Rodgers was traded for. It was looking like they were an absolute Super Bowl contending team. They were going to light it up on offense with him and Breece Hall. Really, they were talent deficient essentially everywhere else, but it wouldn't have mattered. Garrett Wilson would have eaten this past year. Instead, he finished as a high-end wide receiver 3. But here's a couple things to look at. When we look at his target share, he was 4th in the entire league this past year. Here's a couple of stats to like, though. He finished 4th in total targets. Now, these targets were absolutely awful, and a lot were uncatchable, while also receiving constant double teams and matching up with the team's best corner. That made life pretty challenging for him. But then he also had the 7th highest target share in the league. You can expect more of the same because let's look at their wide receiver core this year. Garrett Wilson, elite stud. Then they have Mike Williams. He's probably going to get hurt pretty soon. Do we even know he has any juice left? An ACL tear at that age is pretty concerning. Xavier Gipson, there's been a little bit of buzz about him, but he's going to be a nothing burger. Malachi Corley has been viewed as potentially Aaron Rodgers' new Randall Cobb. Well, if we know anything about the Packers, though, Randall Cobb was the second option to Jordy Nelson. Nothing to worry about there. Allen Lazard, the only reason he's on this team is because of Aaron Rodgers. He is absolutely terrible, despite being 6'5", huge, and what should be an amazing, dominant red zone threat, but he's not. So, looking at their situation, oh, and by the way, they have Tyler Conklin at tight end, nothing to worry about. Really, their second best receiver, as I've said in past videos, is Breece Hall. Except for the 3 games in which Mike Williams plays, sorry. But think about it. There is no target competition, and he's going to be receiving passes from Aaron Rodgers. He's somehow been able to finish as a high-end wide receiver 3 and a low-end wide receiver 2 with worse than 32nd best quarterback play. He's about to receive what at least projects to be top-shelf quarterback play. In redraft, draft him to win your fantasy championships. There's a great chance he's a top 5 wide receiver, and he absolutely could be the wide receiver 1. Make no mistake, these passes are going to be a lot better. And in Dynasty, he's going to gain so much value that if you're able to acquire him now, you will absolutely be able to sell him for infinitely more after this season. My second wide receiver is Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. Somehow, he's only 22 years old going into his 3rd season in the NFL. That's right, he was 20 years old when he was drafted. Just like Garrett Wilson, he has dealt with absolutely atrocious quarterback play. And just like Garrett Wilson, it was worse than 32nd best in the NFL. And he had no consistency at quarterback. Just like Garrett Wilson. He is a prime example of a wide receiver that is set to take flight this year. Arthur Smith is out of town. Good riddance. Goodbye. Usher in the new Rams offense. He is going to eat. In Dynasty, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 12 at the 309. He's going to be valued as a top 10 wide receiver after this year. Think about it. He's not even 23 years old. He'll be 23 years old after the season, obviously, but that's still insanely young. He's going to carry a lot more value than he does right now. You will be able to sell him for multiple first-round picks, and probably a little something else on the side, too. Going at the 309, that's a solid value. Then we look at redraft. He's being also drafted as the wide receiver 12 at the 309. Funnily enough, it's the exact same spot for him. This seems utterly ridiculous. I don't see how he isn't a top 10 wide receiver this season. Yes, he has to contend with Kyle Pitts, but they're both going to eat because they're the only credible receiving threats on their team, unless you consider Bijan Robinson one, which he's really solid there too, but you know, he's not going to be their first read ever. It's going to be Drake London a majority of the time. Not only did he receive 1 QB upgrade, he received 2. He's the alpha on this team. He's going into a much better scheme now. He's not going to be used as a decoy on purpose. Imagine what he's going to be able to do with Kirk Cousins or Penix. Alright, so this past year, he did finish 24th in targets with 109 and 25th in target share with a 23.3%. But this was with Arthur Smith once again. Think about what the Rams have done in the past. Think about how Cooper Kupp has been hyper-targeted by Matt Stafford. Now, Drake London doesn't have Matt Stafford, but it's also partially because of the scheme and not just because it's Matt Stafford. He is going to be fed early and often this year. He is by far their best receiver, and he's their X wide receiver. He is going to attack down the field over the middle of the field, and he's going to be fed slants all day long in this scheme. And the best part about this scheme is it's the Sean McVay scheme. He is one of the most creative play callers, and he excels at getting his playmakers the ball. He doesn't use them as decoys. He actually wants to win. His target share and total targets are both set to go exponentially up this year. I guarantee you he will be near the top in total targets this season. And the best part, they're going to be from either Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, not Taylor Heineke or Desmond Ridder. Then when we look at the team around him, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore, Kaderil Hodge, the superstar receiver that was featured last year at least, Casey Washington, Ray McLeod. Do any of these players scare you at all in terms of taking away from his target share? They shouldn't. Rondale Moore can't stay healthy. Darnell Mooney hasn't done anything since that one blow-up year where he barely had 1,000 yards. It's Drake London's team now, and he is set to dominate and win you your fantasy championships in 2024 for redraft and for Dynasty, both in 2024 and beyond. My third and final breakout player for you is Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. He's 24 years old, standing at 5'11", 187. He primarily plays slot, but he can absolutely play Z, and in a pinch they could throw him out at X. He is in a wonderful scheme with Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur runs the Shanahan scheme. So first of all, offensive-minded head coach, great. But then he's also the play caller, even better. In redraft, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 35 at the 804. You heard me. He is being drafted as the wide receiver 35. He finished as the wide receiver 25 this past year. Yes, he was pretty efficient with his touchdowns, but guess what? He is Jordan Love's go-to guy in the red zone. That isn't going to change. He might not get 10 touchdowns, but he will be a consistent touchdown scorer for you. The scheme is so wonderful. Jordan Love is going to be amazing, and he is his favorite target. You can snag him at the 804. That is insane value. Tell me, what has changed for him to be drafted 10 slots lower than where he finished this past year? What's changed? Nothing. It's a wide open receiving room. Then when we look at Dynasty, he's still the wide receiver 35. What's happened to explain the fact that he's finished as the wide receiver 25 and now he's being drafted as the wide receiver 35? He was fantastic this past year. As I said earlier, his touchdown efficiency might come down a little bit, but another thing, guess what? As you progress in your career, your role grows if you're good. He was fantastic on a per-target basis, by the way, too. He is one of the better route runners in the NFL, by the way, and he has a fantastic quarterback throwing to him and a great scheme and a wide-open receiving room. Nothing about that should scare you, and you should snag him easily at his ADP. Funnily enough, I mentioned Randall Cobb earlier. Well, Jair Alexander, star Packers cornerback, thinks that he sees a young Randall Cobb in Jaden Reed. And I think the same, but I think he's going to be a lot better. Just look at these stats. He finished 8th in fantasy points per route run with 0.56. That's right. He was one of the most efficient players on a per-snap basis, scoring you fantasy points. And guess what? As you progress throughout your career, your role grows. He was a rookie, and he finished 8th in that regard. Think about how incredible that is. If one of these star receivers did that in their rookie year, they would be unobtainable. He was also 5th in fantasy points per target with 2.31 in the entire NFL. A little bit of this is due to his receiving touchdowns, but even if you knock a couple off, think about how high he still would have finished. Looking at the depth chart for the Packers in terms of their wide receivers, Christian Watson hasn't stayed healthy in his entire career. Dontavian Wicks does look like a good breakout candidate, but it's not as if there can't be two good wide receivers. Romeo Doubs has good games here and there, but the one constant this past year was Jaden Reed. He has the slot position locked up. He will be their wide receiver, but he also has positional versatility. He can absolutely smoke you from the Z position. Give him a free release and watch out. He's connected to a fantastic quarterback in a fantastic scheme with a fantastic head coach that's an offensive-minded head coach, and a wide-open receiving room after posting some of the best per-route efficiency stats in the entire NFL. As a rookie, draft him with confidence as the wide receiver 35 in Dynasty and Redraft, and laugh your way to fantasy championships. Alright, so my top 3 breakout wide receivers for 2024, which is really good for you in Redraft and in Dynasty, are Garrett Wilson for the New York Jets, Drake London for the Atlanta Falcons, and Jaden Reed for the Green Bay Packers. Remember that Garrett Wilson stands alone as the top alpha dog with Rodgers coming back. Think of Rodgers to Devontae Adams. Then you have Drake London, the top dog in Atlanta, with the Rams scheme with 2 QB upgrades. It's going to be amazing having him not be a decoy anymore. And Jaden Reed, wide open receiving room, elite head coach with a Shanahan scheme, fantastic quarterback in Jordan Love, who posted some of the best per route efficiency numbers in the entire NFL as a rookie. Draft all of these players with confidence and win your fantasy championships. So, what do you think? Do you agree with my candidates? Disagree? I'm especially curious what you think about Jaden Reed after hearing those stats. Please let me know in the comment section. Also remember that I am building a library of information with which you can use to dominate your redraft and dynasty fantasy leagues in 2024 and beyond. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you and have a good day.